welcome back to Social Soda. I'm Clearly, and today's topic is about NXIVM. So you may have or may have not heard about the corporation NXIVM. It was basically described as a cult. The company made the news quite recently because one of the people who were involved in the activities that they were doing inside NXIVM got released from prison early. So before NXIVM was actually NXIVM, something else was created, and it was called Executive Success Programs. Those were created in 1998, and they were basically seminars and courses that you would take, and they were meant to actualize human potential. And NXIVM was only created 5 years later, so in 2003, by the same person who is called Keith Raniere. NXIVM was basically an umbrella organization over those ESP programs, so executive success programs, and other courses that they were running. So the founder, Keith Raniere, he was also nicknamed Vanguard, and he got a degree in math and physics and biology, I believe. Before creating ESPs and NXIVM, he had a company called Consumers Byline that was shut down following a lawsuit in 1990, and then he created another company which ran from 1994 to 1997 that was called National Health Network. A year later, so in 1998, he created the ESP programs with Nancy Salzman, and a bit later NXIVM, as I mentioned. So this other person, Nancy Salzman, she was a nurse initially, and she joined Raniere in the creation of ESP and NXIVM. She was the president of the organization. She was very much involved in every way and at every level of the organization. She was presiding the company, but also she was running the workshops, the seminars. She was there doing meetings, etc. She got her daughter involved and joined the corporation as well, the organization. So what was NXIVM? So NXIVM described itself as a human potential company that engaged students to reach their full potential. And so basically what they were offering were seminars or workshops and courses to high-level business professionals, and those were basically meant as self-improvement seminars. On the official website, it was written that the company was a professional business providing educational tools, coaching and training to corporations and people from all walks of life. And their philosophy was a new ethical understanding that allowed humanity to rise to its noble possibility. So the company headquartered in New York, in Albany, but they also had centers in the US, in Canada, in Mexico, Central America. So the company was offering those courses which were actually quite expensive. It could be up to $5,000 for a 5-day course, but people would take them because I guess in a way they were seeing this as a self-improvement kind of seminar. But also a lot of the credibility of the company was due to the fact that a lot of powerful people or celebrities joined the organization and was saying all the benefits of their classes, etc. Basically, they were vouching for NXIVM. So the way it worked inside the company was basically a bit like belts and martial arts. So the more classes you would take, the higher up you could climb up the hierarchy inside the company. If you take a lot of classes, then you would reach goals basically, and different levels. And some levels would get you privileges, such as getting a salary or commissions of new joiners, or because you would be also delivering classes for NXIVM, etc. And this was called the Stripe Path. I guess in a way, if you look at the company like this, nothing really sounds wrong about their doing. But for example, there was this thing called the 12-point mission statement that existed and that you had to, I guess, abide by. And some of the statements were, in my opinion, a bit disturbing. I'm not all for it. Let's say. So as I mentioned, NXIVM had a lot of classes, and basically those classes and seminars were designed to kind of change the way you were thinking. So they were using very, let's say, interesting techniques. So one of them was called the neuro-linguistic programming technique, and basically it's a management tool that you use to change how people think and act. It's how you're gonna mirror and talk to the person, communicate with someone. You're gonna be able to kind of step by step be able to kind of manipulate his mind and change how the person is going to think about something in particular. They were also doing this thing called exploration of meaning, where you would talk about something very personal and dramatic that happened to you, and so you would put the person in an emotionally vulnerable position, and you could, when you do that, the person is going to trust you more. And also it was a way for NXIVM to use those personal tragedies against that person. And so over time, when you do this often, the person becomes psychologically and emotionally dependent, the person who's doing the EM, like opposite to you. And remember, none of the people who are doing the EM with the victim, let's say, were like therapists or like healthcare professionals. We're just like random people practicing this. And so EM is quite a dangerous form of psychotherapy. It can produce alterations in thinking, in behavior, in emotional experience, and over time, again, it can like change your behavior and the way you think. So it's like manipulating someone. And so something that I found again in the case file against NXIVM is like this rational inquiry thing. That's basically what they were trying to do to all people who were joining the company and taking the classes. And it was written that NXIVM had a self-esteem eroding curriculum designed to break down students' resistance to reframe ethics, morals, gender roles, and relations. And basically it was remodeling someone's mind at one's expense because you don't really realize what's happening to you. So the company was largely funded by the Bronfman sisters, who were both the daughters of a billionaire. They were basically covering like any money that NXIVM needed to spend. So they invested like millions in NXIVM, and they were especially useful when NXIVM needed to pay lawyers, and so they covered up a lot of the legal fields that NXIVM needed. So there were actually precedents where NXIVM was involved and targeted by critics about either the way they were dispensing courses or about activities that were being run within the organization. There was this lawsuit in 2003, so it was against the Ross Institute. So the Ross Institute deposed a complaint with 8 counts, I believe, against ESP, so it was not NXIVM at the time, but only like executive success programs, about the way that those were not like appropriate way of teaching and was more like a cult kind of thing. So I didn't talk much about Keith Raniere, but he was the head of NXIVM and he was very much there, and everyone would see him as this very intelligent person, like this savior kind of, and everyone had to pay tributes or to thank or to praise him, etc. And all the teachings were like, you know, thanks you, Keith Raniere, for bringing this on the table and like teaching us this. And he was like this grand person that everyone had to like worship kind of. NXIVM had like a lot of seminars available, and there was this ongoing pressure from members to take up more and more classes. So first to like spend money, and also to like just be more and more parts of the organization and like, you know, part of the group and the community. A lot of people stayed, not necessarily because of the teachings, but more because of the community, because again, you know, you would see always same people and everyone would be in the same environment, and you would be like trusting everybody because everyone would be opening up. So like there would be like a very quick trust bond between everyone. And I watched this documentary and so about India Oxenberg, and she was saying like initially that was the thing that made her stay longer and longer, because of the people that she met there. So amongst all the programs that were being offered by NXIVM, some of them were more particularly towards women. So there was this one called Jeunesse, and was a women-only program, and in there they would talk a lot about relationships, about sexuality, about gender roles, the place of the woman, etc. Jeunesse was women only, and they created something that was like basically similar but for men. They also had this like SOP program that was much more extreme, and basically a program where it was normal to abuse women, and so it was made normal for men in this program and women in this program as well to be abused or to abuse. And basically all those different programs were like, you know, from like a low level to like not extreme to like more extreme, and over time again you would be manipulated in the normal teachings, but then you would join those like specific programs for women, and so women were being manipulated to believe and into thinking that it was normal to be abused, or that you should have a certain position or feel a certain way towards like relationships or sex or men in general. In 2015, inside the organization, something was created. It was called DOS. It was basically like dominant submissive program, and it was women only. If you joined, you would have a master-slave relationship. When women were joining this DOS organization, this DOS program, obviously the involvement of Keith and his place and his role was not mentioned at all. It was meant to be like women only, even though he was basically organizing this whole like slave thing. The women who were asked to join DOS were most of the time like very vulnerable when they entered DOS. DOS was presented as this one opportunity that they had to take, you know, to reach their full potential within NXIVM and also personally. So as I mentioned, so in the DOS program, you would have a master-slave relationship. So the slave would be asked to do acts of care and also tributes to their masters, such as, you know, cooking, cleaning, doing errands, doing some kind of administrative task, whatever. They would also have to do assignments, which a lot of the time had to do like with sex in a way, and also like in regards to Keith Raniere. If you were failing to any of those acts or tasks or assignments, you would be punished. And also like a lot of the times you would have to also participate in the readiness drills, which basically you had to be like, say, present or whatever at any hour of the day. So it ended up a lot in sleep deprivation because you had to be like ready in the middle of the night. And also they would have to like be very much counting their calories, and so it ended up in the girls being basically starving and asking for food and water. They had to ask permission for everything. As master, you could receive financial benefit, so one in the form of, you know, having an employee for free, and the second, like, you know, as actual money. They were also responsible for their slaves, so they could get punishments as well if one of their slaves were not like behaving properly. And so there was this example of one woman, so one master being paddled by another because one of her slaves failed at doing something. So the masters were not like all powerful as well, and so the master was actually like slaves to Keith Raniere. So, you know, over time it built up, so you would have Keith Raniere, then the first masters were like kind of slave to Raniere, and then they would have slaves themselves, and then those slaves would have slaves. Like all the women in DOS would have like basically a dual role as master and slave. The last thing that I wanted to mention is the branding that occurred. Branding is like basically the physical mark left on the body of someone. The women were told that it was going to be like, you know, a symbol of earth, like of the earth elements, like water, fire, whatever, and it ended up being the initials of Keith Raniere. So some women were like scarified basically with like a pen. So I talked earlier about this person who was released from prison early. So this person was Alison Mack, and she's an American actress, and she was very much involved with DOS. She was one of the first masters, so she had like her own slaves as well. Amongst the other people who were involved in DOS, you would have the daughter of Nancy Salzman, so basically the daughter of the president of NXIVM was in DOS. And you would also have one of the Bronfman sisters, so the people who were basically financing NXIVM. So how did it all came out and like basically crumble down is when in 2017 one of the DOS members came out and publicly denounced the company and denounced everything that was being done. So it was the defection of a very high ranking member of NXIVM, so it made like a lot of noise. So in 2017, after this big like scandal around NXIVM, some investigations started. Initially it was like secret investigations, eventually it was brought up to light, and there was a really big trial against the Keith Raniere and all the people involved. The thing that was difficult in the trial was to demonstrate that people involved in those criminal activities, especially in the DOS program, and so that those people were being pressured or pushed or blackmailed or manipulated in a way that they didn't have basically free will to choose to leave or to not do those actions. There was this doctor, Brendan Porter, so what they were trying to do initially was to prove that their programs could cure psychological illnesses such as the Tourette syndrome. So they needed like a medical data to back this up, so they set up experiments. One of them was to measure brain waves of someone while that person is doing something. So what they did is like they measured the brain waves of someone being showed extreme violent scenes, such as people getting murdered or I don't know, rape or stuff like that. Obviously, it was a very traumatizing experience that those members were exposed to this and was like quite unethical. So this doctor, he got his license removed during the trial. So Keith Raniere, or Vanguard, got sentenced to 120 years of prison. So I doubt that he will ever get out. But some of the other people who were convicted served a lot less long time, such as Alison Mack, who is very much involved. So I guess it's up to debate whether she deserves to be out. So I hope you enjoyed this little video on NXIVM. I hope to see you next time.